Welcome to Innovator Café, the entrepreneur go-to, with your host, attorney Dave Stevens. Through each episode, Dave and his guests provide resources and assurances to build a company growth roadmap. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the website stevenslawgroup.com. Now here's the host of Innovator Café, Dave Stevens.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Innovator Café. We are so lucky to have our guest today, Stephanie Sharis, co-founder of Lightbeam Stories. And I'll let her talk about the background of it, but I will tell you that I have been very much involved in Lightbeam. I'm a big believer in Lightbeam and a big believer in Stephanie. And we're going to learn a lot more about her and where she is now, but how, more importantly, how she got there and how she used her own path of innovation to develop what she's built. Stephanie, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Dave. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, well, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and how you came about Lightbeam?
Sure. So Lightbeam was really a company that formed during the pandemic, which I think prompted a lot of us to take a moment and, be very introspective about what our purpose is, both professionally and just what we intend to do. It allowed us to really slow down, sort of forced us to slow down. And I also had the added benefit of having an infant, in the mix. So what I wanted to do, because I was transitioning from a pretty intensive role as CEO of a children's magazine company. I've been in digital media for over 25 years and, I was traveling a lot. I had a company where there were about 50 people in Chicago, 20 people in DC, and then we had a team in China. So, I think I would define at least 20 years of my career as being very intensive. I was probably a little bit married to the career. And so, what I wanted to do was take all that I had learned in streaming media and in growing companies that are content driven and say, what is a gap in the marketplace, which every innovator does, the product market fit. And I really felt that having spent, a good number of years distributing impact documentaries, I really felt like they weren't really moving the needle. And as well-intentioned as a filmmaker might be, they are really trying to get their point across, and it's a preaching to the choir medium. And I'm not dissing documentarians. I have produced documentaries. I believe in the form, but more often than not, if you see a documentary about a certain issue, it's presenting a side and hopefully compellingly that will sway you, will move you. But really, I spent a lot of time looking at human nature and the power of the moving image to bring people together rather than be in a mode of trying to influence, to really have the agenda be telling stories about amazing people. And so when you look at social science and you look at people that have left hate groups, the real, the moment where they realize that they are, viewing the other in a hateful way is when they realize there's connections. Like, hey, they have a kid who suffers from autism. I have a kid who has the same issue. And you start to really realize that we have a lot more in common than our differences. And there's a guy, I think there's a movie being made about him, but there's definitely lots of articles about him, African-American guy who befriends all these guys from the KKK and has converted so many. And he says it's when we're sitting around having a beer and they say, "But hey, Joe, you're not one of them." And, they almost like view him as this like, exception to the rule of their hate, and then
Yeah.
slowly chips
He
away.
has like a temporary visa, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and then they realize, hey, Joe is just like these other people I see around, and the divide starts to chip away. So really, Lightbeam was born with my knowledge of there's a space in the market for family friendly, uplifting content. When you look at Ted Lasso and all of these shows that are centered around a protagonist that is morally excellent. And then also this notion of, if I want to, bring about good in the world, let's use stories that spark empathy, that aren't agenda driven. And that's really Lightbeam. Lightbeam is a streaming company that shines a light on extraordinary people, and really with the intention of making people hopefully be motivated to do other, incredible things, even tiny little things in their life, in every day, buying the coffee for the person behind you, those little acts of kindness. That's really what our company is setting out to do.
It's interesting. I'm raising kids too. I know you're blessed with a daughter. My boys are a little bit older, and I often hear parents talking about how can you teach empathy. And it's really it sounds like what you're saying. It's more about examples, right?
Yeah.
And you're also talking about the role of media in addressing. Well, at least you're getting easily into mental health issues, right? Depression, anxiety, and stress. I mean, stepping back. I mean, empathy is the first thing to go when there's depression, anxiety, and stress.
Yeah.
So what kind of impact do you think, or do you want to have with these documentaries on mental health issues? How can the media really help that?
Well, for one, media is the culprit in many cases, for instigating a lot of that anxiety and stress and hatefulness. So what we want to do with our stories is almost provide nourishing media that will provide you with a hopeful story. Maybe someone that is suffering from a disease but has conquered, a personal goal of theirs. And so if you're watching and you have some connection to that story, you realize, like, there's hope for me. I think, you hear about girls who, African-American girls, when they get a doll that looks like them, there's this connection of, like, I see myself. So stories sometimes can be a reflection and say, I connect with that character. Or you might have nothing to do with maybe a girl in Pakistan with a totally different upbringing than you, but they love piano, right? And there's this connection. So what I hope is that these stories, again, the idea of media bringing people together, or if you're feeling lonely, and a lot of kids are feeling isolated, there's, the rate of suicide is staggering. Before the pandemic, symptoms of anxiety and depression were 1 in 6. Now it's 1 in 3. So it's a crisis. And if scrolling, I call it doom scrolling with these crazy things. But what if you counteract it with some hope scrolling, so that there's almost like do you remember when the FDA put out that pyramid of your diet, where you're supposed to get like certain things? There's this, it would be insane to think that we're going to get kids off this. It would be insane to think that, we're not going to be bombarded with all the hatefulness in our mainstream news. If it bleeds, it leads. But we want to just start, serving up some of the good stuff, not broccoli that's like, hard to, consume. We're not trying to be something that feels like the after school specials when I was growing up, but really compelling and fun and engaging stories that, again, hope to move the needle and help people feel better. The notion of content and media to lift one's mood and deal with mental wellness, just like you would, 2 minutes of meditation or going out for a walk, you do things that are good for you. And I hope Lightbeam becomes a source of that.
I noticed, a friend of mine told me this too, but I noticed flying here, I saw these different lounges and airport places and screens, and I'm seeing less news. They're pulling it down. And someone told me they went into a lounge at, I don't know what it was, United Airlines lounge or something like that. And they said, hey, I'd like to see the news. And they said, no, we're not allowed to play the news here. So they're already starting.
Well, think about it. News is so agitating, and it's become opinion. I'm just talking about cable news, and
Sure.
No one watches the network news anymore. But the network news, when I was growing up, it was Dan Rather, Tom Brokaw. Yes. But now we have these personalities on both sides where there's not a lot of real news. So I think that airports have realized that, watching bickering, all the kind of us versus them, or things that are all about like the fires in Malibu, or an earthquake in Indonesia. So all of that will get you right before you're boarding a plane, in a minute.
You're already unsettled.
Yeah, not that it's not a soothing medium.
Right. So how is Lightbeam going to change that?
Well, I would love Lightbeam to be on all those airport screens. And I'm very proud to say that we have a show that is being produced. It's called The Real Ones, and it's being hosted. If anyone in the audience is a Blacklist fan, he was one of the main leads for about, 8 seasons. His name is Amir Arison, and he's also in the Ridley Scott series coming out on Apple TV very soon, I think in a matter of weeks now. And he is going to show a Lightbeam story, and this is going to air for 60 million people a month who come in and out of these airport lounges. So we're really proud of that, and it's going to have Lightbeam, branding. So I feel like that's one step toward our goal of getting these stories out, and that'll air, over and over. We've got 6 episodes for the first season already in motion.
So it's a brand of positive stories.
Yes. Yep.
And how are you coming up with new ideas? I'm not hearing that these are, and we talked about this before, these are not commercials for the sponsors. And then obviously you're not advocating, right?
Right.
You're storytelling. So How are you coming up with these stories that are, I won't call them neutral, but they're positive, right? And it seems like if you're neutral, it's necessarily positive.
They're centered around a human, it is character driven. So I think that it makes it, you're just following an inspirational person, right? And
right.
You can interpret inspiration. Literally, you could just watch someone build, a beautiful guitar from scratch, like an artisan, like that. Yes. And maybe, this was a tradition passed along generations, and, there's beauty in that. Or it could be literally a person, a paraplegic, who is climbing up Mount Everest, like this incredible feat. And we have stories, all over, the map in terms of topics from sports. There's lots of inspiration in sports, but, kids who are learning that charity, giving back and taking their allowance and, buying backpacks for foster kids. So these are character driven stories. And when you follow humans, we all have connections. We are, that idea of the shared humanity. So I think that's that connective tissue of, hey, we have a lot more in common than we have differences. Like if that we can hammer home, we've done our job.
It seems like almost any story where you show, especially at kids, I'm a sucker for, I'm a sucker for kids, right? Where they are learning to give away, give back, unselfishly. How can you not be inspired by such a thing? I mean, really.
Yeah. It's funny, I want, already we're doing that with my daughter's toys. And we've done it from the very beginning. So she just gave away her kitchen set, to a family in need. And
what a sacrifice for a young girl.
yeah. And, she loved that kitchen set. She used it, incessantly. But then as kids do, now she's into Barbies. So she's not really into her kitchen set. So
Right.
It also, I think, at an early age gives her this feeling of, it's not tears, and she helped me clean it so that we could give it to them with it looking nice. So I hope parents do that in all the little ways. And then, I'd love for her as she gets a little older to come, and do volunteer projects. And so that doesn't feel like a big thing. And I think that was taught, to me by my parents. And so the first thing I wanted to do out of college was give back, so this was
Sure.
I went and taught in inner city East LA as a 19-year-old. I was teaching 16, 17-year-olds. But for me, education was really, a massive gift. And I felt like, if I could be a teacher that was impactful, that was almost required of me, to spend time for our family, which family of immigrants. My dad didn't go to college. My mom was a nurse. They raised 3 kids, that all went to Ivy Leagues. And it was, important from the early days to do this.
They must be very, very proud. They must be very proud, right? And so you can teach giving and empathy to kids.
Yeah, I mean, if you do it where it feels not like a lesson, but just part of being a good human, right? And then the day will come when, they volunteer in their own mind, like, hey, I want to give this to someone, or I want to be nice to this family. That's going to be a wonderful moment for me to see that happen, intrinsically.
It's an incredible lesson for children. When I was a boy, there was a terrible crime that happened where I grew up in Michigan, and a 20-something man killed a young boy, and it was just an awful story. Well, he went to our church, and when all of that happened, of course, the guy was arrested. All this was going on, and the father became like this pariah, and it wasn't him; it was his kid. And no one would go near his house. No one would talk to him. He was, I mean, you can imagine the emotions. My father took me over to their house, and I waited in the car, and he went inside the house. He knocked on the door, and the neighbor, like, watching him, right? Went inside and prayed with this man. I still choke up when I think about it. And as we're driving home, my father was a man of few words, right? And he says, sometimes you just got to do the right thing. Right. I mean, it was something, here's a person that was completely isolated from society for something he didn't do, right? You can imagine all the other emotions he was feeling. And my father just broke through and gave him something that he was missing, right?
That's just incredible.
Yeah, and and it's, to me, it's all about teaching kids. I have more, years behind me that I have in front of me, and it's really about the kids, isn't it? Right.
It really is. There's nothing more important, that a parent can do than to hopefully create that constitution where caring about other people is just part of being a human.
Right. So tell me more about some of the stories, some of the topics that you plan to tackle in the future. Stories, people walking through the airport that'll catch their eye and get their attention, and hopefully improve their life rather than continue the aggravation that they're feeling.
Well, I mean, one of the beautiful stories that we've been lucky enough to create is, I think this was one of your guests, a profile of an incredible coach, and the impact that one individual can have to to be a formative, character builder, and to instill, love of the game rather than, this really toxic environment that, we see in a lot in youth sports. By the age of 13, something like 66%, kind of phase out of youth sports. And it's a real problem. So I think anything that you see, visuals up on the screen while you're sitting there waiting for your plane. Most parents, most adults have had either the experience of being a competitive, athlete as a kid and what that was like for them, and what, whether or not they had a coach that was inspiring, or conversely, a coach that was incredibly traumatizing. And one of the things is that you can't tell stories of redemption and inspiration without acknowledging that there are bad characters out there.
This is so true. Yes, this is not the Disney network, right? I mean, you really need to state a problem, don't you?
Yes, 100%. And so you'll see, if you go to lightbeam.tv, you'll see films that, or on our YouTube channel, you'll see films that will make you cry, right? It starts out sometimes with trauma, with a real, an event that is brutal, or you're inheriting, or some health issue. But how does that person persevere? And what, what kind of path did they carve out, despite those, those barriers? So that's what, I think about the movies that made you cry. E.T. makes you cry. There's, those are the kinds of stories that, we have big dreams for Lightbeam. Our little films are right now 5 minutes. So they work perfectly in an airport screen where you don't have, 90 minutes. But, we hope that Lightbeam becomes one of those brands, those, brands where, you're going to go and get something that makes you moved, really, impacts you, and you think about, and you may see in a movie theater one day.
It's funny too. You're picturing this Venn diagram. Okay, where is the hot spot where everybody has felt this thing?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And if you can get someone to identify, even if they're hurt, watching this replay of their life in someone else's story and seeing how they dealt with it, that can be extremely powerful, can't it?
Absolutely, because you have that little light bulb that goes in, your head. Either I'm not alone, someone else went through this, right? That there's that connection. Or if you're feeling hopeless and you're in the middle of it, if you're a parent whose child is going through this, maybe there's a sense of, what can I do to help my child? And, being motivated to do something because you see, hey, someone went through the same thing and got out, on the other side. So, I think that's really the power of storytelling in general, right? If you watch a movie and you find yourself crying, it's because you're watching that character go through something that you connect with in some way. You might, really feel akin to that person, or, there's something that you will connect with, as on a human level.
I remember watching the movie The Accountant, which is it's a very violent movie, right? But it's a great story behind it, a human story behind it. I'm watching it with my wife and my kids, and they could see me. I'm just getting all emotional, and they're like, "This movie, right?"
Right.
And the reason is because I have a brother, and I was younger than him, and he got picked on a lot, and I was vigorously defending him constantly, right? And it really was a big part of my growing up. And here I am, and it had nothing to do with it. No, it had everything for me to do with this movie, right? It was this brother-brother relationship, watching out for each other, having each other's backs. And it really hit me. And here's my family, like, this movie? This is not an emotional movie. I said, it is for me, right? And it's what is inside the person, right? If you tell it in a caring way, then how can they look away?
Yep. that's why people who are storytellers, everyone's kind of called to hopefully impact the world. You can do it through, being a doctor.
Sure.
I fall into the media, the storytelling world. And, I think there's a lot of power in that.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. Storytelling and the audience, right? Well, tell me about, so in this path, I met you early on in this process, and you were home with your daughter, and you were building this company. We were in COVID, and gosh, all those challenges around that, especially something that's so socially oriented as your company, right? You're working on this isolated, but sweet mother of irony, right? Tell me about how you innovated. I'm not talking about technical innovation. I mean your life, your career, and this business to get where you are today. What did you do that no one else was doing that was really unique and different?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that launching a business during a pandemic, is a surreal thing. I met you purely through a LinkedIn outreach, right? And engaged with you. We had I remember our first phone call, and you told me in depth about the book you were writing, right? And so the connections, we recruited our whole team. I met my partner and co-founder through, networking, and raised, the financing we needed to get up and running. And we just went for it. And we really felt like, and I would say our trailblazing part of the company is the business model, which is helping brands convey a story about their values, because consumers care about a brand and what good they're doing in the world. There's a sense of, am I buying from a company that treats their employees well, that isn't a climate polluter, or cares about certain issues that I care about, like the Dove campaign, body positivity. We embrace all all shapes and sizes. It meant a lot. They were telling stories about their values without saying, this soap is, creamy and smells good and will leave your skin soft. It wasn't about the product. It was about the values. And so lots of brands need help doing that, because sometimes it could be a brand like a technology brand. How do you humanize that? How do you make that kind of a story? And so it's
not the first instinct of a tech person to humanize this. Right? Look, it's faster, it's better, and this is connected to this, is connected to this. I deal with this every day, right?
Yeah, but you'll see a company like HP do a whole series on young girls who are doing incredible things in science. So like a STEM series of a girl who creates a robotic that helps people who are suffering from an epileptic attack to get help. There's a sensor, these incredible advances in science that aren't about an HP computer, buy this computer, but it celebrates innovation, young girls going into science. Hopefully they're attracting women into a workforce that they're going to need to remain profitable. So sometimes it's it's looking, at the long-term vision of, helping to inspire a future workforce, or it's just connecting to the consumer on a human level. And that's what, they're coming to realize, that the straight, on the nose selling a product and all its features doesn't resonate particularly with young people. Young people are all about, does this company, like fast fashion, is that bad for us? Am I going to, upcycle? All these words that I don't even know really what that means, but I'm not that generation. There's a whole generation where it matters, and
values matter.
Have to embrace that there's a different psychology for consumers. And so that's what, we are focused on. And we did that with a beauty brand that is all about, a vegan beauty brand, all very simple ingredients. And instead of being like, hey, here's all the, product features, we focused on an incredible woman. This was our protagonist, our human story, character-driven
Right.
story, who back in the day, when she was a makeup artist for models like Kate Moss, these supermodels, she would not use any products that were tested on animals. And she lost jobs where she couldn't bring her own makeup. And she, was kind of considered this hippie, barefooted kind of, but now she's sought after. She stood by her values, and the makeup industry was all about one-use applicators, a lot of waste. It's gone to become a lot more sustainable. So that was an interesting way of telling the values of that beauty brand through the story of this one inspirational makeup artist. So this is what we intend to do more and more of. And we think that positions Lightbeam in a place where we actually add incredible value, because when we tested with that story, and we did a comparison of an ad that was just a straight up, here's why this product is great, versus our human story, we had 6 times the engagement. So we know that people engage with stories. There's a factoid where you can remember facts when they're wrapped up in a story. So much better than just being fed fact after fact in a 10-second spot. So,
like memorizing in school.
or remember those, like, you'd remember, obviously, like those, I don't know what the word is, where all the letters form a sentence in your mind. And if you're trying to do memorization, we wrap it in the story.
Right. Well, the best brands, and what they should really learn is the best brands don't talk about their products. It seems bizarre. Apple, think different. Do you know anything about an Apple computer before you buy one? No, you just know that if Einstein had a computer, it would probably be a Mac, right? That was the message.
Yeah.
And, even Nike, right? I mean, they're selling a commodity, shoes, right? But they don't talk about the shoes and the traction, what it's made. You don't see that, right?
I mean, we all know that just the words "do it," that's powerful. Like, it couldn't be more simple. It is a call to action. It is about, sucking the marrow out of life. Like, it's a beautiful, elegant, amazing slogan.
And even if a company doesn't have a story that is directly related or somehow relatable to their product, if they tell a Lightbeam story and it's just sponsored by, say, Nike, pick a company, right? And it just shows that they have these values. And that's really what they're talking about, these values.
Absolutely.
You don't need to have this branded, having their product inside the Lightbeam story video, right? That would be almost cheesy.
And in fact, I think that's a deterrent, right? People want authenticity, and they'll sniff out, like, oh, this feels like a little bit like an advertorial or a glorified public service announcement. That is kiss of death. And there are a lot of brands that are getting it wrong. And their, classic example, not to diss Lexus, but Lexus did a commercial, which you can Google, and you just Google Lexus empathy commercial. It was just maybe a well-intentioned ad, but it backlashed because it was a African-American person driving in this beautiful car, and it just looked like driving through impoverished areas, and it was a lot of poetry about empathy, and it was just not well conceived.
Absolutely pandering.
Yeah, and that's what happened. You look at all the social media, and boy, whatever money they spent with it. So there's a process to telling these stories in the right way, and I think that brands need assistance, and that's why they seek out creative agencies, or they work in partnership with a company like Lightbeam.
Right. It's not about the jingle anymore, is it? right?
No, but those jingles were great in the 70s, right? But
I can
they
sing any
feel
one of them. I will tell you, my kids crack up, right?
Oscar Mayer. I mean, you
Chiquita
can.
Banana.
Oh, I
Right.
love that one. There, it's great for like game night, right? We can.
Yes.
But in terms of selling product, we're in a very different world.
No doubt about it. So the millennials, youngers, and I think it's catching on to adults too, because they want to be as cool as they are,
Yeah.
where these shiny brands aren't really the big thing anymore,
Yeah.
right? Where it's a fluency, rubbing their nose in it type of thing,
Right.
right? It's almost like empathy, rubbing their nose in it. I'm a better person than you are.
It's like the conspicuous display of like, I've got this fancy bag. I see a lot of millennials, like they're really supporting designers. Like it could be indigenous women who knitted this, beautiful shawl that I'm wearing. Or you go to Etsy where you're really supporting, you're going straight to the source, the person who
Sure.
actually touched this product, made it. And that's really beautiful because, to just buy something that's been mass produced, that has kind of soulless, it
Right.
feels, that young people are they're hipper than us. They're attuned to what they wear, and the decisions they make reflect their values. And
Sure.
so they want the companies to, say, hey, what do you stand for? And we liked, my business partner, Parker, said, you have to stand for something to sell something. And that doesn't mean you have to go out as a brand and, make a statement about a controversial issue. No. If your brand, think about the Honest Company. That's, Jessica Alba's company.
Sure.
It's
Mm-hmm.
for kids, diapers.
Mm-hmm.
And we use
Shelves
those
full of-
products for
Mhm.
our bath soap. It makes me feel good. I know that it's not chemicals going into her water, it's, cleaning her beautiful skin, so I feel good as a mom. And I think that, millennials are when they can make decisions about the brands that they support, they feel good supporting a brand that is good.
No doubt, no doubt. And even the display, you're displaying that you gave back. They
Right.
just look at that bag and say, that person gave back. They didn't pick that $10,000 Louis Vuitton bag. They picked something else, and however pricey it was, it went to the source, which is where the world needs to go in their minds, right? This is giving back, right?
Right.
So airports, other places. I mean, this type. I mean, spreading these types of stories. I mean, how can we spread them even further? How can
I have a grand vision. At the gas station, you get a little Lightbeam fix. You get it when you're on an elevator. You have those little screens. Maybe in the back of a taxi.
Sure.
But clearly, before you go to bed, we'd love to be in your feed where you're winding down at night. I have a master's degree in public policy. I was a news junkie. I had it playing always in the background. I mean, it was like my white noise. And I think for many, the news cycle during the pandemic was like the end of the world. The Orson Welles radio, where he basically said aliens are coming into New York City, and everyone literally believed him and fled. It felt a little bit like that. The fear mongering was epic. And then, it just was like nonstop, the end is near, doom. And I listened to it at the beginning. We were getting all important, health information. Sure. But then it really, when it became political, there's a lot of, Trump on one side, and, the other side,
right.
This was not a healthy. It wasn't healthy for me. So I don't have that in my feed. I don't have, my news is not coming at me. I go to the sources I want, and I'm a lot better off for it. I would recommend other people to be very careful. You stay informed. Don't put your head in the sand. You want to be a citizen, which means you have to be active and stay in the know. But having it be something that is always in your ear is not good for you. So that's where
digital rehab. There's your digital rehab advice for the day, right?
Yeah, it's like hashtag IRL, go outside in real life, experience. My stepson got to the point where, when they have dinner, they put their phones in the middle of the table and they engage. They know that no one looks at their phone, because then, on the flip side, I've also been with him where he just cannot take his eyes off the phone.
Sure.
He'll stick it under the table and he's checking. So it's like, we have to really, because it's just human nature. I find myself, going there. But at least if you go there, that there's some goodness. So that's why you should follow Lightbeam. There's the good news movement. There's Tank Good News. We're not the only ones out there, but boy, it's a good jolt of dopamine to watch these little clips that make you really smile. And, I think, it's a mental health product.
And it is news, by the way. It's not news, right? It's, CNN and not nothing against CNN, right? CNN, Fox, there are some polar opposites, right? Those are news, and they have their own brand. I'll call it brand of news. It's probably 10 minutes of news and 50 minutes of commentary, right? And it just gets toxic. But what you're talking about is still news. It's not a movie. It's not some cartoon. This is something that is actually happening that I've never seen before. It's news to me, right?
Yeah, I mean, you could even, there's a quote with Mr. Rogers. He said, look for the doers. Even in any crisis, there's always someone it's look for the helpers. There's always someone doing something good. And even in, the horrific situation in Gaza, there are a couple of stories that I read of schools with Arabs and Jews and a lot of cultural connections. We have to focus on, and these are news stories where, things are happening in the now. It's not like from 5 years ago. So to me, if we can highlight those stories where there is something good, or there's an advance in science that we don't hear enough about, I think, Lightbeam can tell these stories in beautiful documentary form. And then other sources can do it more, journalistically.
Sure. Yeah. It seems, the battles in the world are very well played and well staffed, right? They don't need anybody's help. They don't need our help, right? And it seems like stepping away from those and not ignoring them. Certainly, there is justice that is due in many parts of the world, right? And even near us. And that's something I am extremely vigilant about. But there's also the side of positive stories that could be a gentle way of solving problems without battle and without very hard division lines.
Right. I mean, that's why we would love there to be a movement where people say, hey, there's an incredible do-gooder in my backyard. Come and, write about them. A lot of local news is dying. And it's a problem. I went to a conference and I heard I listened to, oh my goodness, it's going to Susan Rice. I was thinking Condoleezza Rice, but it was Susan Rice. Right.
Susan
and
Rice.
She said the need for us to get to know one another is a huge kind of gap in the world. We're just otherizing each other, and local news
otherizing each other. I love that. Yeah.
But local news is essential, and that's where all the good people are, right? Like it's on the ground, community gardens and urban centers helps people where there's food deserts and they can't get produce. And so they're making produce. Like those are problem solvers. Those are the helpers that Mr. Rogers was talking about. That's where, if we can rise those stories up to a level where people are consuming it, Again, it might motivate, inspire people to do whatever they can, but it's important to get those stories of innovation, which is what you're focusing on, of
Yes.
helping other people, of just, being good, caring citizens of the world.
Excellent. Great points, Stephanie. Great points. Any advice for budding entrepreneurs out there, not just in business, but people who are innovating their life?
I have essential: do what you love, do what you care about. If you're out there, making a widget for an industry that you're not really connected to, you should be solving a problem that you deeply care about. I just listened to a former NFL player who is involved in a new science company that detects concussions, like full body scan, because he had one. He suffered
It's
from it.
home for sure.
And so I think if you do what you love or solve a problem that you yourself, feel you would benefit from, you're going to be that much more successful. Don't run for like, everyone's doing AI, I got to do AI, or everyone's doing fintech, I got to do fintech. It won't resonate, to that why that every entrepreneur has to answer.
Right. Excellent advice. Excellent. Stephanie, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us on Innovator Cafe. Hope to talk to you again soon.
My pleasure, Dave. Have a great one.
You too.
You've been tuning into Innovator Cafe, the entrepreneur go-to, with your host, attorney Dave Stevens. You can find more episodes on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the website stevenslawgroup.com. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others.